This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is Babes in Toyland, the 1934 film with Laurel and Hardy. I'll be talking with two people who agree with me that it's a great film, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Babes in Toyland is a 1934 musical, and I would also argue it's very much a great kids film, and I think also a great horror film that has been criminally underrated over the years. And I have two people who want to talk about it. On the top of the screen, I have Conrad Brunstrom. On the bottom, I have Jen Seggio. What I like to do is usually just have them give a little background information about themselves, and then we'll dig into things. So, Conrad, let me start with you. Who are you? Are you a critic? And what are your opening thoughts about the film at hand?
Hey, thanks, Dan. Well, I'm head of the Department of English Literature at Maynooth University in Ireland, and I'm a sort of obsessive compulsive blogger who loves all things Laurel and Hardy. But in many ways, I think the appeal of Babes in Toyland stretches beyond the, as it were, Sons of the Desert Laurel and Hardy tent. It is a remarkable film about how to be frightened as a child. I mean, somehow or other, both in terms of design, conception, plot details, and acting, it manages to activate the fear centers of a childlike imagination. And I think that's why it's a great movie. So that's my opening pitch.
Yeah, there are two films that I always go to, and this one I would put as the third one. One is Godzilla's Revenge from the late '60s, which is about a latchkey kid in post World War II industrial miracle Japan who gets into trouble and imagines things from old Godzilla films and recycle them. And it's a great picture of the loneliness of a child. From a child's point of view, he deals with bullies, monsters in his dream world, gangsters, and possibly a too friendly old man. And then there's also Curse of the Cat People, which is the sequel to the original Cat People, which is about a little girl's loneliness after her mother's death and the story she hears about it. And it's supposed to be a sequel to a horror film, but it really isn't. So this one I put in a similar category, even though it's not from a child's point of view. The world seems to have that point of view. But anyway, on the bottom of the screen is Jen Seggio. Jen, welcome. As I asked with Conrad, can you give a little bit of background about who you are and your opening thoughts on the film?
Yes, I do blogging as well, and I mostly talk about random films I enjoy, a lot of fantasy-related media, and I'm also a children's book author. And well, my intro to the film came primarily from both my father and a friend of my sister's who had the videotape, and I fell in love with it. And it's a tradition in my household. Every Thanksgiving we watch the film.
Yeah, when I was a kid growing up in New York City, it was on every Thanksgiving. Oddly enough, there would be a King Kong and Godzilla marathon, and then at night, the whole afternoon, Thanksgiving afternoon, was King Kong and Godzilla. And after about 8 or 9 hours of Japanese or I guess just big monster movies, this came on late. And it's interesting now that I think back of it, this movie is a lot scarier than any of those movies, I think. But so let's turn to the film at hand here. First of all, are either of you familiar with the operetta, Herbert's operetta that it was based on? And can
A
you
little,
expound?
a little bit. I did a little bit of research on the operetta when I was writing the review of this film, almost almost exactly 5 years ago to the day.
Oh.
And it's fascinating how many. There's almost no singular version of the operetta. It's changed and evolved so much over time. And you can even see that in the many film adaptations of it as well, from Laurel and Hardy onward.
How about you, Conrad?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not directly familiar with the original Victor Herbert, but I defer to Randy Skretbent, who is the man the acknowledged authority on all details to do with Laurel and Hardy. And in his lavishly illustrated book about this movie, he goes through all the iterations of this film, and not just the films that existed and the theatre versions that existed before Babes in Toyland, but all the ones that came after, and all the hypothetical ones that might have been made instead of the ones that were made, along with the detailed life trajectories of everybody remotely involved in the production. It's a true labour of love. I mean, it's a very strange and interesting phenomenon, the sort of filmed operetta. And the ratio, as it were, of comedy and song is very difficult to get right. And somehow or other in Babes in the Wood, it's sort of nailed. It's got right. I mean, one thing is it's got really a rather cute couple, Felix Knight and Charlotte Henry, who had already achieved fame as a Hollywood Alice in Wonderland, and in fact was the only success in this Hollywood Alice in Wonderland, because all the other stars, like Gary Cooper and Cary Grant, were encased in so much makeup that nobody knew who they were, but the Alice, as it were, survived. And Felix Knight was not a great actor, but he had a great set of pipes. He could belt out a tune. And the odd thing about this film is you're not actually sort of drumming the table waiting for Laurel and Hardy to show up again, because they're kind of cute. You sort of wish them well. You care about them. But of course, that only makes it scarier. I mean, there's no film scarier than a film about people who you are drawn to,
Yeah, going off of that, yes, there's this wonderful balance of both the romantic couple, the sweetness of Bo Peep and Tom Tom, and Stan and Ollie's antics there. You're not wishing for one or the other to finish to go back to the other one.
Yeah, and do we know if in the other versions, I remember seeing from the 1950s or 60s, same era when, let's say, Mary Martin's Peter Pan was always broadcast on American television. I remember there was the later 60s version, but did that have the equivalence of Stanny Dumb and Ollie D, Or...
There kind of was. Are you referring to the Disney version?
Not. It wasn't a cartoon. This was, I think, sort of like a live or a version.
Yeah, Disney did a live-action version, the very early 60s with Annette Funicello, Ray Bolger, and several others. They kind of did, but instead of making them sort of the main characters, they're the Barnaby's henchmen in that. But they're very clearly modeled off Laurel and Hardy. They even got actors who resembled them. Very strongly.
Which only goes to accentuate the fact that they're not Laurel and Hardy, And also, you don't really buy Ray Bolger as a villainous figure. Whereas Henry Brandon, or Henry Kleinbach, however you want to call him, is an extraordinary figure.
He's wonderful.
He's a very Scrooge-like figure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, everything, what you can never forget once you know it is that actor was only 22 years of age when he played this villainous old man. And oddly enough, you realize that an older actor couldn't have actually played the role. He's actually scarier because he's actually a young man playing an old guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a vitality, an energy, a speed, and a danger to him that, a real elderly actor couldn't have actually pulled off. There is something quite uncanny about this young man impersonating an elderly guy that is, only accentuates the terror, I think.
Yeah, he does it so well for the first half of the film, but in the latter half, when there's more action, up until that point, I forgot that he's a much younger man. But he pulls it off exquisitely. Just so lovable. He's so wonderfully hateful that you just can't wait to see what's coming to him.
You used the term uncanny, and I was going to bring this up that, there's a term called the uncanny valley, where people get frightened by things that are close to human, but different enough that we know they're not human. It's usually applied to in the modern day to robots, but this whole film seems to have an uncanny valley. It's like looking through a telescope through the uncanny valley. There's the young man playing the old man in Silas Barnaby. There are the bogeymen who are, oddly enough, their fur has the ass flap of an old underwear that people wear that's actually pulled down. So it's like if you, for me, when I've had dreams, even as a child to now, it's not of satanic beings or getting stomped by Godzilla or the alien from Alien. It's not that kind of thing that's in my nightmares. It's little things like maybe my cat is missing and there's something a little bit off, or seeing someone that I knew as a child, for example. I'm in an adult situation and the person is still a child that I knew. And I think this goes throughout the whole film. Oliver, Ollie, and Stan are a little bit off. The monsters and Barnaby are off. There's the Mickey Mouse character, which was loaned. The only time I think that Disney ever let a copyright go without having to pay for it, to have this bizarre monkey play Mickey. And then there are some other characters that are just weird, grotesque versions of it. But even I think Tom Tom especially and Bo Peep, with all that caked makeup on it, they look almost like mannequins rather than real human beings. So this whole mini pocket universe or whatever that Toyland is just some really scary shit when you think about it. Jen, do you want to have a comment to start?
I get a lot of people saying that they feel it's very uncanny and weird because it's this strange late 1800s storybook style transplanted to the 1930s. Yeah. And I can see those two clash in a couple of those designs, like you said, like the Mickey Mouse or the giant cat. Yeah. Or even some of the little details, like there's a grandfather clock in Mother Peep's house that has the man in the moon as the face, and that looks strange. I get that, but I think that's a lot part of the charm too, as well. Like up until this point, there was almost no other film, any fantasy film especially, that was quite like this, and it's new territory, and it's wonderful in a way. I think it kind of like almost sets up a template for films that are yet to come, both like the MGM musicals and show things like Wizard of Oz, and even future real life experiences like Disneyland.
Yeah, and even the wooden soldiers, because in New York, as a kid growing up in the U.S., 9 times out of 10 this was called March of the Wooden Soldiers. But even the soldiers with their rosy cheeks and their wooden visages, they're scary as hell, because it's almost, and the way they just plow through things, it's like Night of the Living Dead almost. They're doing more damage than the bogeymen. Conrad, any comments?
Yeah,
they're very robotic.
Yeah. It's actually the one soldier who gets decapitated towards the end and keeps going. Yeah. That's a real Terminator moment.
Right. Right. Good.
That's a creature that cannot be stopped. You cannot reason with it. Yeah. It will not stop. It's not made clear. The Disney tie-in is interesting because not only were they allowed to dress up a monkey as Mickey Mouse, but they could use the Three Little Pigs music as well. And apparently this is because Hal Roach used to play polo with Walt Disney, and which is very much how Roach operated. Let's play polo, let's play golf, let's fly planes, let's build these personal relationships. So Walt Disney would do a deal with Hal Roach that he wouldn't have done probably with anyone else.
I'm reminded of that. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm reminded of that quote from Roger Rabbit. Got him on loan from Disney, him and half the cast of Fantasia. That's what I always think of when I see that Mickey and the Three Little Pigs come in.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It very clearly prepares the way for Wizard of Oz. And it comes second to Wizard of Oz in the sort of, timeless memory of, TV fantasy that shows up on a regular basis. It's the Thanksgiving film. Yeah. It wasn't so much in the UK and Ireland, incidentally, but it Wizard of Oz has been analysed to death,
Mm.
but Babes in Toyland comes second, to Wizard of Oz in terms of its sort of resonance in all sorts of ways.
Well, it's certainly not. It's certainly not as well known. But I think that the flying monkeys and the Wicked Witch, they to
Yeah.
me are more standard ideas of the monstrum, if you will. Whereas the creatures in this askew universe, everything is off. Again, it's sort of. I guess for me the difference is this is sort of like Toyland is sort of like cosmic horror. It's almost like a Lovecraftian kind of view of the world. Whereas if we wanted to look at some of the more horror aspects of Oz, to me that's more universal horror. I don't know. Would any comments on that, either of you?
That's an interesting take because I get what they're coming. What I get what you're saying with that because it's almost like a rite of passage for children to be scared of the witch and the flying monkeys or the trees, and this isn't known quite as well, like you said. And I was a little bit afraid of the boogeyman as a kid, not like to the point where I was hiding behind the couch or anything, but
Yeah.
I can definitely tell that's it does embody this sort of uncanny unknown. Like from the moment when Ollie started to describe them, it's building up that image in your mind, in your imagination. What are these monsters like? What is it about them that makes them this dreaded unknown figure in Toyland? And yeah, it builds up very well because in the end, it's not just one monster; it's a whole horde of them.
Yeah, and it's also too.
I mean,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Conrad.
One difference between the two films, of course, is that Wizard of Oz has Kansas. It has a home.
Yeah.
It has a starting point and an end point, a place of return. You can
Yeah.
escape from this fantasy.
Yeah.
And by balloon if necessary. There is a way back.
Yeah.
Whereas Stan and Ollie they are stuck in this strangely lit and designed, creepy environment.
It's
no
like it's
external.
almost hellish.
Mm-hmm. In the end,
It's
the best they could
subterranean.
do is.
Yeah.
In the end, the best they could do is just keep the monsters away and
Right.
hope they don't come back.
Yeah, chase
That's
them and
all.
knock them into the moat.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid, one of the things that actually scared me the most was the sort of public shaming of the ducking scene.
Yeah.
I did not like the entire community gathered together to watch Stan and Ollie being treated in this way.
That's a good point. It's a savage society that they have.
Yeah. I was confused by it as a child. On the one point, I didn't like. Again, they were sort of like being put through this mockery, but at the same time, I didn't really understand it, and I thought it looked like some sort of fun double dare water thing. I had no idea they were trying to drown him.
And the very end is a joke. I mean, Ollie is stuck with all these darts, and the entire community laughs their head off. And part of me, I think, even as a kid, thought, this man has saved your entire town along with his friend. Stan and Ollie, they're not particularly incompetent. I mean, they make their mistakes from time to time, but they do, in fact, save Toyland.
Well, Stan has that uncanny ability to knock the little whatever there it is with the sharp things and hit it with the wood, and he gets all of them in the butthole. It seems.
Yeah, that's
and
something that I
is
find
actually quite clever. Yeah.
It's something very triumphant and heartwarming in that because you start out the film with them making mistake after mistakes, but they're trying so hard, and in the end, they come out the heroes. And their biggest mistake, which is the mix-up with the soldiers, is what ultimately saves the day.
Exactly.
And it's this very heartwarming note to it.
So before we move on to talk about the actual narrative of the film, I just want to bring up two other things and throw them by you to see if it sticks. The first is to stick with the Disney thing. One of, I think, maybe the greatest published children's book of all time is Pinocchio, and there's a scene in the cartoon version that is not even as bad as it is in the book version, and you probably know what I mean. It's the boys that become donkeys, and the lost boys or whatever they call them, and how they grow the ears, and then they forget that they ever were human, and there's the same kind of I guess we call it, you're talking about the town and how they laugh at poor Ollie who's hurting at the end. There's a kind of viciousness to this whole little universe. Toyland, it just came to me, remind me of the 1970s children's Saturday morning show called Land of the Lost. You might not have ever heard of it, Conrad, but here in the U.S., it's a pocket universe. But that's even though it has ferocious dinosaurs, it's kind of benevolent, and the people can live there. Not so in Toyland. Jen, you look like you wanted to chime in.
No, I was just saying that. Oh, I know Land of the Lost. So, yeah.
Oh.
I thought for a moment you were. I didn't know you were going to speak to Conrad.
And so, how about the thing with Pinocchio? Either one of you, that kind of children's horror too. There, does that? Do you find?
Well, now that I'm older, I do find the stripping, that dehumanization of that terrifying, even more so than the actual transformation itself. But I do have to say, even though there is that slight streak of malice there in some of the people, I do notice that they also can get quite joyful, quite happy. They're thrilled when Barnaby is, humiliated and defeated. They're happy when Bo Peep and Tom Tom plan their engagements. And they express their disappointment when Bo agrees to marry Barnaby. I still think, maybe it just depends sometimes. Who knows? People are fickle that way. That's how society is.
How about German expressionism? When I think of this film, this seems to maybe be the last gasp of expressionism. Certainly in the U.S., there was only a few films that come to mind. But the way Toyland, it's clearly an artificial world. The flowers don't look real. The homes that they look on either look cardboard cutout or somehow it's again. What was it? Maybe it was a Twilight Zone episode. Or no, there's also an episode of Star Trek where they have the showdown at the OK Corral and the saloon is and then there's that episode, if you've ever seen the British show The Prisoner, too, where he's in a western and it's a cardboard. Which suggests that Toyland is just an artifice of some sort, and that's very expressionistic. Conrad, how about you? Do you see any links?
Oh, The Prisoner is a good one. The Prisoner is a good one. The village of Port Merion, this strange, purpose-designed, brightly coloured community that was designed and which in the 1960s, was the setting for one of the more bizarre and compelling TV series about paranoia ever made. It's amazing that that they hadn't read Foucault actually when they made The Prisoner. The one thing about the sort of strange, eerie, unfamiliar look about the film that has me thinking a lot is that this film is one of the great test cases that challenges my usually absolute hatred of all forms of colorization. I mean, usually I'm quite boring and tedious and ferocious and unpleasant and relentless in terms of my opposition to colorization. But if there is one film in which the colorization it might be this one.
Yeah.
I'm on the same boat as well.
Colorization's very, yeah.
Yeah, I think too, because colorization, especially back in the late 70s or early 80s, when I'm assuming Turner or someone colorized it like that, the technology wasn't up to snuff. So it's almost like looking at a paint by numbers where the colors bleed out a little bit, and it adds an aura of irreality to it, I think.
It looks at times almost like an etching or an illustration, or
Right.
like you said, the paint by numbers.
Yeah.
And yeah, and going on that, it is one of the very few films I can get on board with the colorization of it. And they were originally going to film it in Technicolor, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, they hit their budget, and it was a great disappointment to the cast and crew that they couldn't.
Yeah, Stan Laurel desperately wanted it to be in colour. And so here we have a situation where the sets were designed with the possibility of colour in mind. Because always my argument against colorization is that you can't twiddle knobs and turn a black and white film into colour, because creative decisions were made on the basis of what it would look like in black and white. Even if they would have rather made it in colour, they made decisions on the basis of what black and white would look like. Whereas in this particular instance, there are two things. One is the sets seem to have been designed with colour in mind. And the other is that if the colour looks a bit weird and fake and unnatural, well, that's the whole movie anyway,
Yes. Going back to what Dan said about that artificiality, I think that really lends into it wonderfully. I mean, I distinctly recall one moment when they open up a house, like a dollhouse, and in a way that's almost maybe how one could view the film as just as a child's plaything, or something happening in their imagination, just making up the story of all these characters and toys. Who knows?
I mean, there are all sorts of strange first drafts flying around, some of which did actually have an entry sequence from the real world into Toyland in some of the earlier Hal Roach drafts. And some of the Hal Roach drafts look even more terrifying than the film that was actually produced.
That's what I heard. I know Stan Laurel stepped in after a time and wrote, basically wrote the film we know as we know it today.
Conrad, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I mean, it's so the plot took quite a while to sort of iron out and sort out. Accounts of the filmmaking get confused because of it's not clear the extent to which Hal Roach, who after all lived to be 100, his accounts are reliable. And there are stories that this was the beginning of the end of the working relationship between Stan Laurel and Hal Roach. That this was the beginning of the end, and the creative differences became too strong, which is tricky when you figure out the using Hal Roach, Laurel and Hardy films made subsequent to this. So in the sort of Laurel and Hardy community, this is regarded as perhaps a pivotal film. And Hal Roach always claimed that Stan Laurel couldn't really imagine whole stories. He was just a gag man who could think of arranging jokes in a particular sequence. But again, this seems suspect as well. I mean, Stan Laurel was one of the most extraordinary individuals, very rare creature indeed, in that he was a control freak perfectionist without being an egomaniac. That is to say, he wanted complete creative control over everything, but he didn't need to see his name in the credits every other line. He was prepared to allow other people, to take the credit for things, providing the product was up to his specifications.
So let's talk a little bit about what actually happens in the film. And again, I don't know how close this hews to the original operetta or any other versions, but we mentioned Silas Barnaby as the villain. And as you said, we find out later that he's almost this demonic figure at the end. But in the beginning, he is very much like Scrooge. He is very much like, I forget the name of the bad guy in It's a Wonderful Life. He's
Mr. Potter.
Mr. Potter. He's a predatory. He's a predatory capitalist in the middle of the Great Depression that presumably Toyland may also be suffering. And he's going to foreclose on, Mother
Peep's
shoe home.
Mother Peep.
So, how about Jen? Is this also a political allegory that was being made?
Who can really say? It really is kind of like the perfect way to get the audience to root against him, just to be another mustache twirling villains going to throw the family out in the streets, take the home.
Yeah.
Hmm. It's almost vaudevillian in that regard. It's funny you brought up Mr. Potter because I made that explicit connection in my own review of the film.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison, the sort of 1930s foreclosure mood. I mean, you could say the same thing, actually, about the end of Wizard of Oz. I mean, she has got home, but she's got home to a Dust Bowl 1930s environment. And, for all we know, the day after, the bank will foreclose on the farm and Toto will be put down. It's hardly a return to an idyllic or a secure environment. Yeah, the idea of him as a predatory capitalist, but then there's added to it this really, really hideous sexual thing as well.
His lust over Bo
Few
Peep.
things are nastier than the way in which he is sort of pomading himself on his wedding day. I mean, the wooing scenes of Bo Peep are really satisfyingly hideous.
I especially love how that first moment where after he's trying to hit on her, Bo Peep eventually just puts her foot down and says, "I wouldn't love you even if you were to die tomorrow," which I was too much to hope for.
Yeah.
Like she really lays into him. It's a really wonderful show of character. She's such a sweet girl, but she also has a spine, which is wonderful, especially for the time.
Yeah.
And
she is the worst shepherdess of all time, of course. I mean, she loses her sheep.
It's all in the rhyme.
As Tom points out, she lost the sheep 5 times the previous month. Given the small dimensions of Toyland, you imagine that any sheep that are lost are going to be found relatively quickly. There doesn't the circumference of this domain didn't seem to be sufficient that sheep could go missing for that long, or anyone could go missing for that long.
True, but given this is also a world where nursery rhyme and fairy tale characters exist, you have to wonder how much of them are made to just live out their rhymes day after day, to act as they're told in their story.
A very Sisyphus-like existence.
Who knows?
Exactly. Yes.
So, one of the things we haven't touched upon really yet is that this is a musical technically too as well, and it's not wall to wall songs because of the presence of Laurel and Hardy presumably, but there's at least a dozen or half a dozen or so songs that are sung. Well, Tom Tom is and I don't know what fable he's from, but Tom Tom is the presumed romantic lead, who the real true love of Bo Peep, and they have their natural the swelling harmony that they're odes of love to each other. What about this film? Do you think that what is added by the musical numbers, do you think, there? Because musicals are inherently unrealistic to break out into song, it again makes this an askew kind of universe. Jen, what is your thoughts about the musical aspect?
Well, I know you mentioned the German expressionist, almost realism before, and that I was going to bring it up, but I guess I'll bring it up here now. It reminds me a lot of Disney's Snow White, which really drew heavily on that. I mean, also, you got the imagery like the witch and the forest, but then there's also like the Snow White and the prince staring at each other at the well, and you get that same dynamic here with Bo Peep and Tom Tom singing, and even how they sound is very similar. And I, at a very young age, I always found it to be very hopelessly, wonderfully over the top romantic. And I don't remember who said it, but it's a thing that applies to just about all musicals, where if you feel something so strong, you can't express it in words, you have to sing it. And I think that's how they go about it. And this ties into the plot in a couple of cute ways. Like, you see, sort of like, you're drawn into their romance through the first song duet they have, Don't Cry, Bo Peep, where he leads the whole town helping her find her sheep. Then the second one, Castle in Spain, where they think they've gotten rid of Barnaby for good. They're planning for the future. Everything looks bright.
Mm.
And then their last one, Go to Sleep, which is when they're just trapped in Bogeyland together. And they just need that moment to calm down, reassure each other that we're here, we can get through this together. And that's what I get out of it. You can't just have the characters say these things; they have to say them.
And Tom is the one who's exiled, and Bo Peep goes after him. They think, the machinations. Tom is thought to have thieved something that Stan and Ollie screwed up. What is the reason he's exiled?
It actually ties into the nursery rhyme Tom Tom is from. Tom's the Piper's son, stole the pig, and away he run. Only in this case, Barnaby has framed him for kidnapping one of the three little pigs and turning him into sausage. So
but Ollie
that's why he gets
notices that it's beef sausages and not pork sausages. So clearly something is awry, and clearly Tom is being set up.
Yeah, I especially love the little physical attributes. The little action Stan does in that moment where Ollie says, "I smell a rat," and he just picks up the sausages and smells it and says, "Barnaby's got a hand in this." And he starts inspecting it. Like, he takes it very literally. That's something that flew over my head as a child, but now it just cracks me up.
Yeah, and so let's just talk a little bit about the two ostensible main characters, Laurel and Hardy. They were obviously the biggest stars then, and even though you have the two romantic leads, the bulk of the movie it's not overly skewed towards Laurel and Hardy, but they go through a lot of the machinations. They lose their jobs because they're incompetent. They, like you said, smell the rat of Barnaby behind them, and they ultimately go after to try to rescue Tom and Bo Peep. What of those can we make of these two characters, both as characters within the diegetic tale, but also as characters that can connect? To me, they seem to be the child's eye window into this world, because without them, this is really a godforsaken kind of world in a way. With these two, though, if you ended up in Toyland as some sort of purgatory, you just hang out with these two dopes and you'd feel better about yourself, kind of thing. Conrad, you look like you're ready to go.
I mean, it would be hard to try and imagine seeing this film without knowing who Laurel and Hardy are. I mean, they have pre-existing celebrity. You know who they are. You know what the nature of their relationship is. I mean, sometimes you hear people talking about the world of Laurel and Hardy as innocent. And it's not. It never is. They are innocent. The world they inhabit, whatever world they inhabit, is actually quite dangerous and cynical. And if you watch Laurel and Hardy movies nowadays, it's astonishing how tough-minded these films are. I mean, major Hollywood comedies reward good-natured idiocy. There are actually very few Laurel and Hardy films, if any, that have a happy ending. Two good-natured idiots in the Depression will come to a bad end. And that's taken for granted throughout most of their work. It is hard as a child, perhaps, seeing them treated so badly at various points. They retain their capacity to do their traditional business. Ollie will shout at Stan, but no matter what, Ollie will be hurt more than Stan.
Yeah.
Whatever suffering is inflicted on Stan, Ollie will get it worse, is the logic, which is played out in this film as in all the others. Yeah, we do need them as a window onto their world. They are a place, they are characters we already know. We know how they're likely to react, both to one another and other people. And then, of course, there is the extraordinary elegance of Oliver Hardy. Kind of a shame he didn't have a song to sing himself, because he had a beautiful singing voice. You notice Ollie in this film, as in so many other films, he can't perform the slightest task without a little flourish. He can't knock on a door without sort of mannered gesticulations. It's part of what makes him so delightful.
So the climax of the film comes towards the end. I mean, we have the shenanigans where like Stan is trying to be passed off as Bo Peep. Even in this askew universe, that's a hard sell. But the when they go to they cross over the moat into the Toyland, when Barnaby is rejected again, he then sort of unleashes the bogeyman on him. I don't know in the diegesis, are they sort of like lost? They're almost like lost souls. I would think it's almost like, even though it's just a moat, it's like crossing the river Styx. There's something about these, because they're vaguely human. They remind me, both in terms of the makeup in the actual film and the role they play, they almost are like the Morlocks from the Time Machine.
Yeah.
They're subhuman. And like I said, they have the little ass flaps as if they're flesh. It's almost as if is there a human being on there? I talked about the Pinocchio becoming the donkeys. Have human beings degenerated? Is this a purgatory for humans because the rest of these fictive characters? Just to speak generally to the last scene where the invasion by the bogeymen, and then Stan and Ollie unleash the almost as bad, and I mean the wooden soldiers aren't really saving Toyland because out of nobility. They're just sort of programmed to do it. They could just as easily turn against Toyland had Barnaby gotten control of them. What is your idea of that final battle, if you will, for the soul of Toyland, Jen?
I think it's really fascinating. For one thing, one thing that really struck me is how just easily Barnaby calls them, is able to rally them. One has to wonder if maybe this could have been a plan this whole time to invade and capture Toyland for himself. One of these days, overthrow King Cole, make himself the new ruler. It's kind of a terrifying thought there. So when you have that in mind, having the soldiers come in is a pretty, I'd say it's a very triumphant moment. I appreciate the stop motion effects for the time are really good in those opening moments. And and again, you see the soldiers not just, even though they are storming and wrecking the place, you do see them rescue the children who are being captured. And
yes, that's also, now that you remind, there is when I'm going on a lot of memory on this. I just looking at a few clips before the show, but yes, there is the kidnapping of the children. So there is even that more added dread of the child that something is going to come and take them away, and the kids are squirming to get loose.
There is a legitimately terrifying shot where you do see one of the boogeymen like break through the window of the children's bedroom, and the kids are like huddled up in the corner of the bed just screaming, and they are taken out one by one, and who knows what might have happened to them. That is one of those terrifying thoughts.
Conrad?
I like that. I like that Morlock comparison.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, I think back to my own childhood, I think the Morlocks from the Robert Taylor 1960 version of the Time Machine, they resonated to a tremendous extent. So, what are the bogeymen? One answer might be potentially that all those people who get exiled to Bogeyman, they Bogeyland, become bogeymen or bogey women. We don't get a great insight into the nature of their society or how they reproduce or anything of that nature. But there is this tremendous sense of abjection, isn't it? They are the expelled. It is a land of exile. It's everything that the garish world of Toyland cannot tolerate is sent out into Bogeyland. Although, there's another group of people who we have no idea what they are at all, which is the Sandman and his transparent gnomes, who send the two lovers to sleep. which apparently was, a point of issue with the censors at the time. You do have an unmarried couple sleeping together. Very chastely, it has to be said. I mean, there's nothing going on there, but, there is perhaps a quiet eroticism to it. They couldn't get away with sleeping together in the middle of Toyland, so maybe there's that opportunity. But I think
couldn't even get away with them kissing either. But earlier on, you can tell they're making out. You just look at Bo Peep's feet wiggling around
oh,
there,
the feet!
socks.
I love the feet. I love the feet. The way those feet twitch happily, you can extrapolate so much from those little feet.
Oh, the Hays Code.
So let's talk about the film, how it was received, its influence, and how it's viewed today. One of the odd things in looking up a number of reviews contemporaneous to it, as well as some aggregator sites, is this film was widely praised, yet it seemed to be praised. Just reading some of the things, it said, it's been many a long day since I've had such pure, and I mean pure, fun as I had watching this film. Another one saying it's the merriest kind of Hollywood entertainment not seen for years or something. People seemed to love the film, and they thought it was lighthearted. Again, it played here in America on holidays, reruns, the holiday season, as we call it here in America, Thanksgiving through Christmas. And yet, all that we spent the better part of 40 minutes or more talking about the deeper strains, seemed to be totally gone over their heads during the time. So they recommended the film, which was good. It's a terrific film, but not for quite the reasons it would seem that it should be. Conrad, do you have comments on that sort of dissonance, cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm thinking is that we shouldn't, assume necessarily that, childhoods have become less scary or less squeamish over the decades. I think, the 1930s our ancestors, as it were, knew how to scare kids. To the extent that I think, as it were, the fear element was taken for granted. And we focus, it's not that the kids watching it in the 30s weren't scared. It was just taken for granted to a greater extent that fear is part and parcel of the fairy tale environment. We had kids, and I think it's part of why it did so well internationally as well. If you look at the legacy of the really dark fairy tale, or the stuff like Struwwelpeter that was coming out of Germany in the mid-19th century. This is dark stuff. Yeah. Darker, I think, than the 21st century is prepared to accommodate. So I think in some ways the dissonance isn't that the kids weren't scared, it's that kids being scared was perhaps less of an issue in the 1930s. It was taken for granted that kids are going to be scared. So in the meantime, we can enjoy the laughs.
You make an excellent point. It's interesting here in the U.S., just to take a slight 20-second detour, is I live here in Texas, and all of the parents drive up their kids in a car and drop them off literally in front of the front doors of the school. So you have this mile-and-a-half snake of cars that takes 40 minutes to drop their kids off, even though some do come by buses. When I was a kid growing up in New York City, this is during the Goodfellas taxi driver era. I was a kindergartner, 5 years old. I had a bus pass, and I went on city buses and took it. It was accepted that life is tough, life is hard, but mom and dad can't protect you. Here's the bus pass. You go to school. So I think that's an excellent point. That in the 20th century, the early to mid 20th century. Like I also said about the Godzilla's Revenge and the latchkey kid, kids were not protected from all of the hardness of life that there is. Jen, do you have a comment on sort of Conrad's point or any of your own?
Yeah, I can see that. I think, we do take for granted that a lot of the great fairy tales and fantasies, you've got to take the dark with the light in order to make it a more cathartic, visceral experience, something memorable. Like I remember when Leica released this wonderful stop motion film, Kubo and the Two Strings. I went to see it opening weekend. I adored every minute of it. It's wonderful and terrifying and creative. But there was a little girl behind me with her father, and she said all throughout the entire film, "Daddy, this is scary. It's scary, Daddy." And not even during, not just during the scary parts, but throughout the whole film in general. I was just ready to say, "Okay, please go home to your minions, kid. You're not ready for this." And you do need that right balance there. And there is a great balance, like I said, with this film. A lot of great comedy, but also a lot of that excitement and terror you don't often see nowadays, like we've been discussing.
Yeah.
So, oddly enough, I had mentioned It's a Wonderful Life. Do either of you know about the sort of the copyright issue? Because for a long time, it seems Babes in Toyland fell out of copyright, but now it's because of recuts and whatnot. Both versions, March of the Wooden Soldiers and Babes in Toyland, are now under the same copyright, and will be at least for the next 5 or 6 years till like 2030. Uh, do either of you have any comments about that or knowledge of that incident?
I was vaguely aware of it. It sounded similar, when I was doing the research for my review. It fell into a very gray area. I wasn't entirely sure what to say about it. But it is interesting that, you bring up the It's a Wonderful Life comparison, because very similar in a strange way.
So
Yeah, I don't know very much about the contemporary situation. Apparently, the reason why the title was changed is that it was bought up by someone who was a huge Victor Herbert fan who actually hated the Laurel and Hardy version,
mm,
the Rogue Studios version, and was wanted the title changed so as to detach it
mm.
from what they regarded as the Herbert classic.
Hmm. That's weird. That's what I heard was that it just got re-released under several different titles in order to keep making money off the film.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that. That crazy fan.
So let's before we wrap up here, and I got a couple of final questions to ask you. I'll ask each of you. Conrad, is there a point you'd want to make about the film? Anything trivial, minor, or that we may not have discussed that you'd like to just point out for viewers who've never seen this?
I mean, everyone should see every Laurel and Hardy film, even the very late ones, which are sad and depressing, We should perhaps remind people that it is funny, that the physical comedy is all, as ever, exquisitely timed. There is actually some great dialogue from time to time. There's one point where Ollie turns to Stan, when Stan is scared of Barnaby towards the end, and I thought, I thought you and he were like that. And he said, well, that was before we were married. And, there is some beautiful acting from both Stan and Ollie. The sheer gormlessness, the delicious, naive gormlessness of Stan Laurel's face is something to behold. So, yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the horror, but there are, legitimate and authentic laughs in between. And I think, Jen, you're absolutely right. This is a film in which the balance of the apparently discordant elements is perfectly timed and worked out.
Jen, do you have any thing that you want to add to this film that we haven't brought up yet?
Yes, I believe it was you. Was it? No. I'm so sorry. And terrible names.
Dan.
Dan.
Me?
No, not the.
Oh,
What?
Conrad.
Conrad. Sorry. I know it's getting late over here, but Conrad, I think you should. Oh, dang! Now I've lost my train of thought. No, wait. I remember. It was that you said Laurel and Hardy are like our our introduction. We know who they are already. We come into this through, and we see the world through their eyes. In a weird way, well, my introduction to Laurel and Hardy in general was through when they used to show a lot of old Looney Tunes and Disney cartoons back in the day where they had them caricatured, and this was my first real intro to them as actors, as in film form, and I think it's a really great way to get kids, but maybe also adults into their work. I think it's a wonderful gateway.
Okay,
and
so
they have such incredible chemistry. Again, those great lines and the physical comedy, and there's rarely been a duo like them. So yeah, they're incredible.
So let me just end with a couple of questions for both of you. Again, this is for people who may not have seen the film. Let's start off more specifically, and then and more broadly. So you brought up sort of the pantheon of their films. Conrad, where does this rank in the Laurel and Hardy galaxy? Is this one of their better films? Is it a mediocre one? I think it's a great film. I think it's a great kids film, and I think it's a great Laurel and Hardy film. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one to rank in the Laurel and Hardy pantheon because it's not purely Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the best full-length or feature-length Laurel and Hardy is Sons of the Desert for me. And of the shorts, I'd go with something like Busybodies or Toad in a Hole, these perfect 20, 23 minutes. There are other films that are not as successful as, Babes in the Wood. Swiss Miss is another sort of Central European silly costume operetta. Although oddly enough, it's set in the present day. It's about people who want to live in a weird Middle European wonderland. This was made in part because a previous musical called Fra Diavolo, the Devil's Brother, had done such good business. So it's playing off that. I think in an odd way, this is yes, certainly it's one of the better Laurel and Hardy films, but it is something else. It is something other than a Laurel and Hardy film. It is a film in which Laurel and Hardy, with all their exquisite comedy of codependency, lethal, terminal, endless, tragicomic codependency, that is a dominant but not an overwhelming element of the film. So it's hard to rank, but yeah, of course it's one of their better films.
And you would agree? Do you think it's also a great film overall, cinematically?
Yeah. I would agree as well, especially I think maybe the closest comparison I can make it to it is an Abbott and Costello film called The Time of Their Lives. Like when you think Abbott and Costello, you think of movies like They Meet Frankenstein or The Naughty 90s, which has so many famous bits like the Who's on First. In terms of
the
laughs,
World War II films too.
Yeah, like in terms of laughs, those are great, but in stories and the other characters are very lacking. Whereas Time of Their Lives, the comedy is top notch, but the plot is first and foremost, and you actually care about the characters for once. And I'd say the same very much applies here too.
And would you also rank this as a great film?
I absolutely would. Yeah. It's actually in my top 10 movies of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's. I mean, yeah. So I guess my final question then is, for both of you, I'll ask you, Jen, and then end with Conrad. Then, if someone hasn't seen this, if you could give just a concise reason that they need to see it. I mean, you put it in your top 10. What would you say to persuade someone to watch it with you?
I would say it's got two of the greatest comedians of all time at the top of their game in this wonderful, crazy fantasy land that sets the stage for so many iconic musical fantasies going forward, live action or animated. It's got a wonderful, loathable villain and a lot of great action, and it's whimsical and charming without being so overly saccharine. It's still incredible. It gets a huge laugh out of you, and if that's all it does, then it's doing its job. It's great.
And Conrad, same for you. If someone hasn't ever seen it, and you wanted to tell them to sit down and watch it with you, what would you say?
I think Jen said pretty much all of that,
Okay.
all of what I'd want to say. I think you mentioned when it, without turning too saccharine, I think actually at times it pushes the saccharine to the max, to the point where the sweet turns sour again. I mean, you've got to really enjoy the unheimlich at the heart of all great fairy tales, haven't you? You've got to, where the sweetness and the light and the love and the sugar and the dance and the music actually gets distilled to the point where it makes you feel a bit queasy. And you've got to kind of love that because that's at the heart of the whole fairy tale experience.
It's interesting you said that, Conrad, because I was just thinking as you were saying that, this film, in a sense, if it didn't have the boogeymen and Silas Barnaby, there is that sort of, you'd want to almost puke on the saccharine, that the dancing around and whatnot.
That's
It's almost like this little universe needs an ejection from time to time of a Silas Barnaby, to keep it from going overboard. It's like one of those tops that can spin almost on a 90-degree. Something has to pull it back into balance, and Barnaby and his
yes.
boogeymen. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, that's the trap that so many, if not all other babes in Toylands that I've seen have fallen into,
Uh,
where they're just so obsessed with just being fun and light, and
yeah.
they don't delve into that darkness. They don't have that threat to offset it. That makes that keeps the plot moving.
Well, I want to thank both, Conrad and Jen, for their time. Conrad, especially, is early in the morning where he is. So thank you both. I will link to both. Well, you have a WordPress, Jen. I'll link to that. And, Conrad, if you have a university page, I'll link to that as well. So thank you very much for talking about
Thank
this.
you.
Both great and, almost not only underrated, but almost forgotten film in a lot of ways. But thank you very much for your time, both of you.
Well, thank you for
Thank you, Dan.
having us, Dan. It's
Thank you.
wonderful to meet you and Conrad. Talk to you about this
Thank
great
you.
film.
Thank you, Jen.